Hey, how's it going, guys? With today being the last day of 2020, I thought it'd be appropriate to take a look back at what this year meant for the monster taming genre and sort of go over all the major releases, updates, and Kickstarter campaigns which really had a great impact on the genre as a whole. Now that said, consider this a retrospective or a monster taming rewind, if you will. This year brought forth several significant developments and was probably the biggest year for monster taming ever. Now that said, there were a ton of things I wanted to include here, but given the abundance of games being revealed, some of which were in an unofficial capacity, I've sort of kept it to what specifically was significant this year and sort of made a big splash inside and outside of the community. A lot of these games that perhaps weren't mentioned in this video will be mentioned in tomorrow's video, which is going to be going over the major things that are going to be happening in 2021. So if you don't see a game here, it's probably because it's coming out next year. Anyways, I really do hope you guys enjoy, so let's get into it. Much of what became of the genre this year could be attributed back to a disdain with how the Pokemon franchise had been handling their games. Now, whether or not you agree with this sentiment is honestly irrelevant, because the reason this genre has grown to what it is simply because a lot of fans were looking for something new and different, but also similar. The biggest splash of January was Temtem's release, which took place late in the month, although hype for the game had started in December of the previous year. Temtem established to a wider audience that you can make a Pokemon-inspired title without it being a ROM hack or a fan game or what have you. This is nothing new. The Pokemon community has been looking for alternatives for years through ROM hacks and games like Pokemon Uranium and Pokemon Reborn. However, this really solidified the idea for a lot of people that new IPs are possible, and thus the craziness that was 2020 was born. Now, monster taming games are nothing new. Earlier in the month, we saw the official release of the Coromon demo, which was a game that had been in the works for quite some time. However, this demo would really start to rise in its popularity later in the year. The game, as of right now, according to Marcel, has 800,000 downloads both on Steam and mobile, and is ramping up to rival the original Nexomon game, which came out years before. It is of my belief that Coromon will be far more prevalent in tomorrow's 2021 video, because I do think it's going to be one of the largest releases next year. Other than that, the Pokemon DLC was also confirmed this month prior to Temtem's launch, which in a way further caused controversy, given the widespread opinion that the base games felt like shells of what could have been, especially with the larger price tag. All of this culminated into the Temtem release, which in my opinion was sort of like the big bang of the genre. Sure, the genre was always here, but it became much more significant and would eventually end up getting its own Steam tag in the form of the Creature Collector tag later. I do personally think monster taming fits better, but it's better than nothing. Riding that same wave of the monster taming hype, two major events happened in February, one of which being the launch of Adore, a game that would in part show the world that monster taming is not strictly a subsect of the RPG genre, but instead can include games with real-time combat, different mechanics, and more. This is why I don't like the Creature Collector tag, because in Adore, yes, there are a lot of monsters to potentially own and use, but you're not collecting them in the same way you'd fill out a Pokedex. You're limited to what you can carry, and the focus is just far different. Another big boom came this month in the form of the Kindred Fates Kickstarter, which caused another huge spike in notoriety for the genre. A lot of people were out saying that this was the new Pokemon, or the Pokemon game we've always dreamed of, or whatever. Kindred Fates showed that an open world monster taming RPG was obtainable, and nonetheless by an indie studio in the form of Skymill. These guys once again, much like Temtem, pushed the genre to new heights of recognition and ended up raising over $700,000 USD, crushing every stretch goal in its wake. I believe that there were several major events this year that opened the world up to the genre. However, I think there were three that rise above the rest, the first being Temtem's launch, the second being Kindred Fates' Kickstarter, and we'll talk about the third in a bit. Now, onwards to March and April, it was pretty quiet in terms of major booms for the community like we did see months before. However, the prior mentioned games would continue to build their communities, and monster taming as a whole would continue to grow steadily as more people became curious of, and I'd even say enamored with, what the genre had to offer. May was another interesting month in that we got the reveal of Cassette Beast, which is yet another monster taming RPG, but this time with its own unique twists. From its 2.5D platforming to the fusion system, which uses an algorithm to create over 14,000 monster combinations, its type chart, which throws out multipliers in favor of buffs and debuffs, and more. This was yet another game that proved that the monster taming formula was here to stay, and that you could really do some crazy stuff with it, making these games far different from Pokemon. This month also brought forth the Kickstarter of Cerealum Ultimate, the 4th game in the Cerealum series, which ended up raising 9 times its actual goal, again proving that there's major interest in these types of games. One very important aspect of this Kickstarter as it pertains to the overarching genre was the reveal of crossover monsters with Coromon, as well as Monster Crown and Monster Sanctuary, 2 games that were already in beta at this point. This sent some major shockwaves within the already established community, as well as setting a precedent for what's possible when Mon devs work together. This in and of itself has started countless discussions about future collaborations between devs, and overall just set a new tone for how we perceive these types of games. In June came the release of the Isle of Armor Pokemon DLC, which had some mixed reviews, with some stating that it was better than the base game, whilst others were stating that it was far too short and not worth the price associated with the DLC pack. However, this claim at the time was very hard to vindicate, solely based on the pretense that you must buy both DLCs, and the second hadn't released yet. So a lot of people complaining about that, they couldn't really make a full judgment until the Crown Tundra would come out later. That said, this coupled with the reveal of Pokemon Unite, a very controversial title for its own reasons, garnered some more interest in the genre as a whole outside of Pokemon, and I'll take the time here to iterate, monster taming is not an anti-Pokemon movement, it just happens to have a lot of people that maybe didn't like the Pokemon games and tended to search, but you can be someone who's into Pokemon and totally enjoy monster taming games on the side or as an equal part of your monster taming experience. You don't have to be against Pokemon to be into monster taming, but it does attract a lot of people who maybe aren't so happy with the current way the games are going. The summer of 2020 was actually huge, considering back-to-back releases and updates, so I wanted to put the 2 months of July and August together to really emphasize how crazy these couple of months are. So firstly, the release of Temtem's long-awaited Kisiwa update was brought forth, and for many was the first new playable piece of monster taming content since the pandemic swept the world by storm. This brought life back to the game, which had fallen off quite a bit after its initial launch, with a lot of old players awaiting this update. The update included a brand new island and brought back a few of the larger content creators who were initially interested in the game during its launch. 10 days later, Monster Crown would finally release its early access after being in beta for the majority of the year, and this was another major piece of monster taming content made public and showed the world how a darker themed monster taming experience with a highly customizable crossbreeding system right down to the individual stats would look like. On a personal level, this was huge for me because I had been playing the beta up until that point and was really looking to finally support the game. Not too long after this was the release of Cerealum Ultimate's Alpha, which in and of itself was great. However, given the time in which it launched, it was essentially further insanity to what was already a packed monster taming summer. This game's alpha went very well, with it championing some features like 6v6 battles, fusion, and more. For many people, this was the first Cerealum game they ever got their hands on. The last major event of the summer and the third massive spectacle for the community was the release of Nexomon Extinction, yet another game that takes the typical Pokemon formula and turns it on its head, focusing more on a story-driven campaign with very unique and memorable characters. This game also drove home the idea to the massive Pokemon community that these types of games can and will exist, and that they're valid. As September rolled around, it would get a lot quieter in terms of the insanity that happened up until this point. However, we did see some major developments, such as a reveal of Monster Hunter Stories 2 Wings of Ruin, which seemingly was the first monster taming game coming from a major developer, and other than the reveal trailer, we haven't been given much information since. We also got the release of Patch Quest's private beta, which would later become one of the most influential titles of the genre in terms of making people question what exactly a monster taming game is and could be. Patch Quest would also find itself a larger community community moving forward, given the developer Liam's engaging YouTube videos on the Patch Quest channel. If you did want to learn more about Patch Quest's influence on what makes a monster taming game, there's a very relevant video linked in the description. Now, October was a bit of an interesting month in that we saw the reveal of the Anitons Kickstarter trailer. Though the Kickstarter itself ended up getting delayed in order to secure a Nintendo Switch stretch goal, the Chain Monsters Kickstarter, which would go on to destroy its goal in mere minutes, and the release of the Pokemon Crown Tundra. We also, towards the end of the month, got a Halloween-themed monster taming game that seemingly showed up out of nowhere, being Costume Kingdom. Though nothing cataclysmic for the genre as a whole happened this month, it definitely brought credence to the idea that these games are here to stay, especially given the Chain Monsters' success. It almost made it seem like any monster taming project could get funded given the uprise. With this month started another upswing in the overall community, and we had just had a Monster Crown content pack right at the end of October. That's why I kind of included it here, and then another to come at the end of the month. We had a massive Re-Legend update which improved many of the game's bugs and which were one of the major focal points holding the game back, the Final Stardust Kickstarter, which is still ongoing, and a very noteworthy development regarding the Anitons Kickstarter. So the Anitons Kickstarter ended up falling through after a month of delay in order to secure that Nintendo Switch stretch goal, and it made for quite the interesting development, because realistically Anitons had everything going for it to make a great monster taming game. Very nice assets, beautiful VFX, a unique concept, real-time combat, and more. The Kickstarter did end up gaining around 800 backers, however this wasn't enough to reach the $75,000 goal. There could have been a multitude of reasons as to why it didn't happen, such as advertisement, timing, other world events, etc. But I'm not going to dive into it here, but I do think this showed that not every monster taming game is going to be successful or get the backing that it needs, and future developers may need to consider this before just jumping into a Kickstarter campaign. That's not to say that that's what happened with Anitons. I'm just saying that I've noticed a lot of developers, especially in my Discord, be a little bit more apprehensive about going for Kickstarter since this event. So I'm not saying this is like an Anitons problem. I'm just saying this is something that happened that sort of opened eyes to people like, hey, my game might not get funded, so I might need to have more before the Kickstarter goes live, or I might need to see if I can secure a publisher first, or whatever. So I do think that while there was the sentiment that the genre was booming, we got a little too secure assuming that every single game would get funded. That said, the devs are still holding strong with the new Steam page, which you can wishlist there to show support, which will help them get a publisher. We also can't forget the Kindred Fates Alpha that, I mean, there's not a lot to say other than the fact that it was hype as hell, so yeah. We definitely ended 2020 off with a bang, with Monster Sanctuary and Temtem on PS5 being released on the same day, bringing even more monster taming to the outside community, which definitely caused another influx in curiosity to the genre. We also received a title called Myth and Island, which on the inside of the community further expanded the types of Mon games out there, with this being a choice-driven game like Slay the Spire, and overall it was a pretty booming month for monster taming as a whole. Throughout my journey this year being a content creator, I've seen it all firsthand, and I've gotta say that despite everything that's going on in the world, at least we've had something to celebrate. Monster taming has been both the ultimate distraction and ultimate passion that I've acquired this year, and I guess in a way, the story of the monster taming genre's uprise is also the story of my YouTube channel. We've gotten so far in just 1 year, and as we look towards the future, I can only see more greatness on the horizon. Thank you guys so much for making 2020 far better for me than I probably deserve, and special thanks to my patrons, and of course my Discord team, who have done an amazing job keeping things running smoothly and all around making this a better community. On the patron side, I just want to say special thanks to Wayne Paul and Valorware, my mega evolved patrons. Valorware is the developer of Ninth on 3, and he was gracious enough to become a patron after I checked out his game, so definitely check out Ninth on 3, it's a lot of fun. Special thanks to Patrick and Dranzikin, my first form patrons, and on the Discord side, special thanks to my admins. Firstly, Barry, aka Barry Bandit Gaming, who also covers Kindred Fate's content. I'll leave his channel linked in the description. Crank, aka the man behind the Fader's Twitch channel. That'll be linked in the description. And of course, my mods, Gil, who also has a Twitch channel, and he does Gil-esque things on there. And Jolly, who is a self-proclaimed enigma. Like I said, I'm going to leave everyone's social media pages linked in the description, so please give them a follow, even if just to troll them a bit. I mean, they're amazing people. I also want to say thank you so much to all of our language support mods who make it possible for us to reach an even wider community. These are Cirque, Marlon, Red Kaiser, and Bislaba, who are all just lovely people overall. And finally, I just want to say thank you so much to all the game devs who've taken the time to make these amazing titles and communicate with little old me. I want to say a very special thank you specifically to Yotham and Marcel, the Coromon developers, Andrew and Rob, the Kindred Fates developers, and Jason, the Monster Crown developers, for both communicating and treating me with so much respect and so much support, even when I was a tiny little channel with less than 300 subscribers. It might seem like it's more advantageous for game devs to come to me now because I've amassed a little bit of a following, but back then I was the tiny guy and they were the ones bringing me up. So I definitely want to say thank you so much to these guys. They've been a big part of the growth of this community. Anyways, I could honestly go on all day thanking everyone, but you guys are so awesome and I'm so grateful for this community and this past year and of course years to come. I'll see you guys in 2021. Until next time, peace.